All right, so we got some new data coming out on just how bleak the 2022 midterm elections are currently looking for Democrats. So I got a great breakdown here from Axios on some of the latest polling that we've gotten on how disastrous this is set to be. But they say here midterm special, key House, Senate, and governor's races to watch. And let's get into some of the details here. They say the midterm outlook for House Democrats is so bleak that even members in districts that President Biden won by 10 to 15 points are in danger of losing their seats, according to election experts, okay? Districts where Biden won by 10 to 15 points, you've seen that much of a dramatic shift against Biden and basically the complete evaporation of any goodwill that the American people were given to Biden. So, it really shouldn't be that surprising when you take into context the entirety of Biden's presidency, especially on something like Build Back Better, which we were talking about for months and months and months, and they're promising all of these different policies, childcare, free community college, extension of the child tax credit, etc., even going back to the $15 minimum wage, all of these other policies that were promised by Democrats, and then just watching all of them get torn to shreds by corporate Democrats within Biden's own party. I mean, again, it shouldn't be that surprising that people are starting to realize how completely ineffective Democrats are, even when they have control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Again, shouldn't be that surprising, but they continue here with more details, saying the Cook Political Report just revised its fall House forecast to a net Republican gain of 20 to 35 seats. Okay, 20 to 35 seats. So honestly, at this point, it would be a complete and utter miracle if Democrats were even able to break even during these elections, but 20 to 35 seats. So seems like we're pretty safely going to assume that we're going to be seeing a flipping of the House in this election unless something dramatic is done to materially improve the lives of average Americans, but I honestly doubt that that's going to happen. But they say Cook shifted 10 races in Republicans' direction and only 2 towards Democrats, with 35 D-held seats now labeled as toss-up or worse. And they say, zoom out, this year was always going to be difficult for Democrats. Historical trends suggest the president's party typically loses seats. So, I mean, yeah, you could say that that's true in the modern context of the United States, but why is that the case? I mean, why is it the case that it's a typical standard that the president or the party in power is going to lose in the midterm elections? I mean, that's only going to be a reality if the American people feel as though you're not effectively following through on any of the promises that they put you there in power for in the first place. I mean, this isn't something that's like an inherent part of how politics has to operate. This is just an example of how, consistently, whether it's Democrats or Republicans in power, that regardless, it doesn't really matter because, they're still going to be serving the interests of corporate America. They're still going to be serving the interests of the military-industrial complex. And so average Americans aren't seeing their lives improved by either party. And so we just constantly have this flipping back and forth where people just get tired of showing up and constantly, having to vote for the lesser of two evils, and you see a situation like this consistently play out. But again, it's not something that has to be intrinsic to the nature of our political system. If you were doing things that were widely popular and you were following through on your campaign promises, then this wouldn't be the case. You would see Democrats up leading in these polls, but clearly the American people are not having it right now. But they continue with a little bit more details here, saying 23 House Democrats have announced that they won't seek re-election compared to just 11 Republicans. So again, already kind of working at an inherent disadvantage there. And they say President Biden's approval has been hovering in the low 40s for several months, with inflation driving down his popularity. And yeah, I mean, there are a number of different things that you could point to as to why Joe Biden's approval rating has been slipping. I think inflation is definitely one of the top issues there for the American people, but he's not really doing anything substantive on that. I mean, take the biggest things like grocery prices or gas prices, for example. I mean, he's not even willing to come out and firmly go after the fossil fuel corporations who are artificially raising prices while they're reaping billions and billions of dollars in record profits right now. They're basically just price gouging the American people, and Biden is running around, trying to appeal to different countries like Iran and Venezuela to get access to their oil. He's completely fumbling the bag when it comes to Saudi Arabia and entirely mishandling that relationship from top to bottom in every way imaginable. So, on any of the different solutions potentially on the table that Biden could have been fighting for to address inflation or address the material economic conditions of working class Americans, he's been completely failing. So again, it shouldn't be that surprising when you understand that President Biden's maximum approval rating throughout the entirety of his presidency was, surprise, surprise, 2 weeks after he sent out those stimulus checks to the American people. So, there's a direct correlation there that clearly clearly Biden is not able to understand or isn't willing to act on actually getting to the root of some of his own flaws. But they continue here saying polling shows Republicans are winning the generic congressional ballot, saying, would you vote for a Democrat or a Republican, by an average of 1.9 points, and they still have room to grow, which, this advantage might not seem like a lot, and it might seem like, it could go either way, 50-50, but, with the inherent undemocratic systems that we have in place, things like gerrymandering, for example, Democrats have to have literally a +4, +5, +6 advantage in these generic polls in order to even break even, or to come out with a lead in these elections. So they're already facing inherent disadvantages, but even on top of that, they're not even winning the congressional polling or the generic polling on these latest ones that we've seen. But finally, they finish off here saying, between the lines, Wasserman says that the situation is especially perilous for House Democrats facing tight races in orphan states where there's no competitive statewide election driving turnout. And they bring up Georgia, my home state here in Georgia, where you have somebody like Stacey Abrams, who's running to challenge Brian Kemp for the governor's position. And she has an extensive, I have my criticisms of Stacey Abrams, but she's definitely effective at organizing and mobilizing voters. So that could have a potential positive impact on somebody like Raphael Warnock's election. But that's not going to be the case in a lot of these different races that we're seeing across the country. So again, looks pretty bleak for Democrats as of right now, at least. But even on the horizon, we don't have anything substantial that Biden is planning to do to win over the American people. And another key point that they don't mention here, but that I've talked about relentlessly on this channel, is that once you get into the actual specifics of where Joe Biden's approval rating has been trailing off the most, it's disproportionately with young people. And so the response to that would be to do things that are popular with young people, namely things like policies that Bernie Sanders was running on, for example, or even just, mild half measures like Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer's $50,000 in student debt cancellation. But he's not willing to do that. We just covered the story the other day of how Joe Biden is coming out saying, maybe I'll do means-tested $10,000 in forgiveness, and oh, by the way, that's going to be tied to a resumption in student loan payments and the further accumulation of interest payments, etc. So, listen, when it comes down to it, he's not addressing the material economic conditions that average Americans are facing. He thinks that he's going to be able to point to things like deficit reduction, as if that's going to be a rallying cry to motivate young people to show up, or to motivate fucking anybody to show up to vote for Democrats in the midterms. So, it's not even just a problem of them failing on the messaging. It's not just a problem of them failing on the policies. It's also just a general problem with their entire mindset of how they think that they could potentially push back against Republicans and overcome these deficits in these elections. It seems like they're really just having the mindset that this is just a fact of nature, and that whoever the party in power is at that given moment, that they're going to lose the midterms, and that there's really not much that they can do about it as they continue to allow corporate members within their own party to sabotage any piece of meaningful legislation that could actually start to reduce the gap and maybe even potentially prevent this onslaught that we are about to see from Republicans in the midterms.